Hi, I'm Nancy. I'm in my early 30s, living in a beautiful suburban home with my husband Victor and our two adorable kids, Laura and Noah. From the outside, we probably look like the perfect family, but let me tell you, looks can be deceiving. I used to be a high-powered marketing executive, but I decided to stay home with the kids, thinking it was the best choice for our family. Little did I know, Victor had his own ideas. "You're doing it wrong," he'd say, hovering over me as I changed Noah's diaper. Mrs. Hawthorne would never let him squirm like that. I grit my teeth and smiled tightly. "Well, I'm not Mrs. Hawthorne, am I?" "Clearly," he'd mutter, shaking his head. Mrs. Hawthorne, his childhood nanny, a name that had become the bane of my existence. According to Victor, she was a miracle worker, practically a saint, and he made sure to remind me of it daily. One day, while venting to my sister Emma about Victor's latest critique, apparently, I was woefully inadequate at making PB&J sandwiches, she sighed. "Nancy, this isn't healthy. You need to stand up for yourself." "I know," I said, "but he makes me doubt everything I do." Later that week, my best friend Lena came over for coffee. Victor breezed into the kitchen, dressed for work, and zeroed in on Laura. "Her hair is a mess." Mrs. Hawthorne always made sure I looked impeccable. Before I could respond, Lena cut in. "Hey Victor, maybe you should call Mrs. Hawthorne for some tips on how not to be a jerk to your wife." Victor flushed red, but before he could retort, his phone rang. He turned to me after hanging up. "We need to talk tonight. It's about the kids." That evening after the kids were in bed, he dropped the bomb. "I've been in touch with Mrs. Hawthorne. She's retired now, but she's agreed to help raise the kids properly." I felt like the floor had been yanked out from under me. "What? You can't be serious." "I'm dead serious. The children need proper guidance and clearly you're not up to the task." "Victor, they're our kids. I'm their mother." He waved his hand dismissively. "And you'll continue to be their mother. Mrs. Hawthorne will just enhance their upbringing." I wanted to scream, to fight, to tell him exactly where he could shove this precious Mrs. Hawthorne. But I was worn down. His constant criticism had eroded my confidence. Against every instinct I nodded. "Fine, if that's what you think is best." The day Mrs. Hawthorne arrived, I felt like a stranger in my own home. She swept in, all prim and proper, immediately reorganizing everything. "Oh dear, this simply won't do," she said, rearranging the kids' toys. "Children need structure, not chaos." I bit my tongue and tried to play nice, but over the next few weeks, she took over everything: meals, bedtime routines, even story time. One evening, I tried to tuck Laura in, but she protested. "No, Mommy, I want Mrs. Hawthorne to do it." Those words gutted me. Meanwhile, Victor was hardly ever home, always claiming he was busy with a big project at work. Late-night calls and hushed conversations became routine. Something felt off. I called Emma, desperate. "It's like I don't exist in my own family anymore." "This isn't right," Emma said firmly. "Something's fishy with Victor, and this whole Mrs. Hawthorne thing is extreme." A few days later, Lena came over again. We were chatting in the living room when I overheard Mrs. Hawthorne in the kitchen with the kids. Now, children. We don't want to be like Mommy, always making messes and doing things wrong." My blood boiled. I stormed into the kitchen. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" Mrs. Hawthorne looked at me coolly. "I'm teaching the children proper behavior." By badmouthing their mother, I was shaking with rage. "Well, someone has to set a good example," she said with a smug smile. That was the final straw. "How dare you? You have no right to come into my home and undermine me to my own children." Our voices rose, the argument escalating. Suddenly, Victor appeared in the doorway. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Before I could speak, Mrs. Hawthorne jumped in. "Oh, Mr. Walker, I was simply instilling proper values in the children when your wife became hysterical." I stared at her in disbelief. That evening, as Victor turned to me with a disapproving look, his words cut through the silence like a knife. "Nancy, I thought we agreed. Mrs. Hawthorne knows best. You need to stop interfering." "Interfering?" I echoed, stunned. "In raising my own kids." I was speechless. That night, unable to sleep, I noticed Victor's phone buzzing on the nightstand. A text preview caught my eye. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, babe. Don't forget our meeting." My heart sank. The late nights, the secrecy, it all made sense now. Hands trembling, I picked up the phone and scrolled through the messages. Dozens of texts, all from someone named Maria. The next morning, while Victor was at work, I called a divorce lawyer and arranged to meet at a quiet cafe far from home. "So what are my options here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The lawyer gave me a reassuring smile. "Given what you've told me about Victor's behavior and the situation with Mrs. Hawthorne, you have a strong case for both divorce and primary custody." Relief and anxiety washed over me in equal measure. "What do I need to do?" "Document everything," she advised. "Keep a journal, save texts, emails, anything that demonstrates Victor's actions or Mrs. Hawthorne's interference." That became my secret mission. I began keeping meticulous records, hidden in a password-protected app on my phone. At the same time, I reached out to old colleagues from my marketing days. "Nancy, long time no hear," my former boss Jake exclaimed when I called. "What's new?" "Actually, I'm looking to get back into the field. Any openings you know of?" As a matter of fact, we arranged a lunch meeting, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. But at home, things only worsened. One night, Victor stumbled in well past midnight. "Where were you?" "It's so late," I asked, unable to hide my frustration. His eyes flashed with anger. "What are you, my keeper?" "I was working, not that it's any of your business." "It is my business when you're never here for your family." Victor got in my face, his voice rising. "Don't you dare question me. I'm the one keeping this family afloat while you sit around all day." The kids were starting to feel the tension. Laura had nightmares, and Noah became clingy and anxious. "Mommy, why is Daddy always angry?" Laura asked one day, her wide eyes filled with worry. I knelt down, my heart breaking. "Sometimes grown-ups have big feelings, sweetie. But it's not your fault, okay?" Desperate for support, I called Emma. "We need proof of what's happening," she said. "What about hidden cameras?" It felt invasive, but I was out of options. Emma came over while Victor was at work, and we set up small cameras in the common areas of the house. What those cameras revealed was worse than I imagined. Victor's verbal abuse when the kids weren't around, Mrs. Hawthorne undermining me at every turn, and both of them conspiring to make me look unfit as a mother. Despite everything, I decided to make one last attempt to reach Victor. For the sake of the kids, I thought. I called his office. "Hi, it's Nancy. Can we meet for lunch? It's important." There was a pause. "Fine. The usual place. 1 o'clock. The restaurant was bustling when I arrived. Victor was already seated, looking impatient. "What's this about, Nancy? I have a busy day." I took a deep breath. "Victor, we need to talk about what's happening at home. The kids are suffering." He scoffed. "They're fine. Mrs. Hawthorne is doing an excellent job." "No, they're not fine. Laura's having nightmares and Noah's anxious. They need their father." "They have me. I provide for them, don't I?" "It's not just about money, Victor. They need your time, your love." His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, smirking. "Is that more important than this conversation?" I asked, frustration building. "Maybe it is," he snapped. "Unlike you, some of us have real work to do." That's when I asked the question I've been dreading. "You're having an affair, aren't you?" His face flickered with surprise before hardening. "Don't be ridiculous." "Who is she, Victor? Your secretary?" He stood abruptly. "I don't have to listen to this. You're hysterical, just like Mrs. Hawthorne said." As he stormed out, leaving me alone at the table, I felt an unexpected sense of calm. This lunch confirmed what I had known all along. There was no saving this marriage. The next morning, I set my plan into motion. I dropped the kids at school, then headed to my lunch meeting with Jake. As I walked into the offices of Victor's biggest rival company, my head held high. "Welcome aboard, Nancy," Jake greeted me with a firm handshake and a grin. "Ready to shake things up?" I smiled back. More than ready. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, a folder in front of me, waiting for Victor. When he walked in, his tie loosened and his expression weary. I met his gaze calmly. "We need to talk," I said. He sighed, already irritated. "What now?" Without a word, I slid the folder across the table. "Divorce papers. I suggest you read them carefully." His face turned crimson. "What the hell is this?" "It's me taking back my life," I replied evenly. "I have evidence of your affair, your verbal abuse, everything." He lunged for the folder, but I pulled it back. Aha! My lawyer has copies of everything, including footage of you and Mrs. Hawthorne plotting to turn the kids against me. His bravado crumbled in an instant. Nancy, baby, let's talk about this. We can work it out. I laughed, a real, unrestrained laugh. There's nothing to work out, Victor. It's over. The custody battle was brutal. Victor's lawyer tried to paint me as an unstable and neglectful mother. But when we presented the hidden camera footage, the courtroom fell silent. The judge's face hardened as she watched Victor and Mrs. Hawthorne scheming on screen. Mr. Walker, this is deeply disturbing behavior, she said, her tone stern. When the judge granted me primary custody, it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. Outside the courthouse, Laura and Noah ran into my arms. Are we going home now, Mommy? Laura asked, her voice hopeful. Yes, sweetie, I said, holding them close. We're going to our new home. As for Victor, his professional life unraveled as spectacularly as his personal one. News of his affair with his secretary triggered an internal investigation at his company. Between the scandal and the mounting evidence of misconduct, Victor was placed on leave. Within weeks, he was let go. 1 year later, I sat in my new office, gazing at a photo of the kids on my desk. My phone buzzed. It was Emma. You won't believe what I just heard, she said. Victor's new girlfriend left him. Apparently, he's facing some serious financial trouble. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but mostly relief. It was finally behind me. Enough about him, I said. Are we still on for drinks tonight? I want to celebrate my promotion. That evening, I toasted with Emma and Lena, raising a glass to new beginnings. To Nancy, Lena declared, her grin wide. The comeback queen. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. To us, I corrected. I couldn't have done it without you. As I looked around at my friends and thought of my kids at home, I realized I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving.